Mopsa the Fairy by Jean Ingelow. Chapter 2. Captain Jack. It has been our lot to sail with many captains, not one of whom is fit to be a patch on your back. Letter to the ship's company of HMSS Royalist to Captain W.T. Bate. All this time the albatross kept dropping down and down like a stone, till Jack was quite out of breath, and they fell or flew, whichever you like to call it, straight through one of the great chasms which he had thought were lakes, and he looked down as he sat on the bird's back to see what the world is like when you hang a good way above it at sunrise. It was a very beautiful sight. The sheep and lambs were still fast asleep on the green hills, and the sea-birds were asleep in long rows upon the ledges of the cliffs, with their heads under their wings. "Are those young fairies awake yet?" asked the albatross. "As sound asleep as ever," answered Jack. "But, albatross, is not that the sea which lies under us? You are a sea-bird, I know, but I am not a sea-boy, and I cannot live in the water." "Yes, that is the sea," answered the albatross. "Don't you observe that it is covered with ships?" "I see boats and vessels," answered Jack, "and all their sails are set, but they cannot sail because there's no wind." "The wind never does blow in this great bay," said the bird, "and those ships would all lie there becalmed till they dropped to pieces if one of them was not wanted now and then to go up the wonderful river." "But how did they come there?" asked Jack. "Some of them had captains who ill-used their cabin boys. Some were pirate ships, and others were going out on evil errands. The consequence was that when they chanced to sail within this great bay, they got becalmed. The fairies came and picked all the sailors out and threw them into the water. Then they took away the flags and pennons to make their best coats of, threw the ship biscuits and other provisions to the fishes, and set all the sails. Many ships which are supposed by men to have foundered lie becalmed in this quiet sea. Look at those 5 grand ones with high prows. They are moored close together. They were part of the Spanish Armada, and those open boats with blue sails belonged to the Romans. They sailed with Caesar when he invaded Britain." By this time the albatross was hovering about among the vessels, making choice of one to take Jack and the fairies up the wonderful river. "It must not be a large one," she said, "for the river in some places is very shallow." Jack would have liked very much to have a fine 3-master all to himself, but then he considered that he did not know anything about sails and rigging. He thought it would be just as well to be contented with whatever the albatross might choose, so he let her set him down in a beautiful little open boat with a great carved figurehead to it. There he seated himself in great state, and the albatross perched herself on the next bench and faced him. "You remember my name?" asked the albatross. "Oh, yes," said Jack, but he was not attending. He was thinking what a fine thing it was to have such a curious boat all to himself. "That's very well," answered the bird. "Then, in the next place, are those fairies awake yet?" "No, they are not," said Jack, and he took them out of his pockets and laid them down in a row before the albatross. "They are certainly asleep," said the bird. "Put them away again, and take great care of them. Mind you don't lose any of them, for I really don't know what will happen if you do. Now I have one thing more to say to you, and that is, are you hungry?" "Rather," said Jack. "Then," replied the albatross, "as soon as you feel very hungry, lie down in the bottom of the boat and go to sleep. You will dream that you see before you a roasted fowl, some new potatoes, and an apple pie. Mind you don't eat too much in your dream, or you will be sorry for it when you wake. That is all. Goodbye, I must go." Jack put his arms around the neck of the bird and hugged her. Then she spread her magnificent wings and sailed slowly away. At first he felt very lonely, but in a few minutes he forgot that, because the little boat began to swim so fast. She was not sailing, for she had no sail, and he was not rowing, for he had no oars, so I am obliged to call her motion swimming, because I don't know of a better word. In less than a quarter of an hour, they passed close under the bows of a splendid 3-decker, a 70-gun ship. The gannets who live in those parts had taken possession of her, and she was so covered with nests that you could not have walked one step on her deck without treading on them. The father birds were aloft in the rigging, or swimming in the warm green sea, and they made such a clamor when they saw Jack that they nearly woke the fairies. Nearly, but not quite, for the little things turned round in Jack's pockets and sneezed, and began to snore again. Then the boat swam past a fine brig. Some sea fairies had just flung her cargo overboard and were playing at leapfrog on deck. These were not at all like Jack's own fairies. They were about the same height and size as himself, and they had brown faces and red flannel shirts and red caps on. A large fleet of pearly nautilus was collected close under the vessel's lee. The little creatures were feasting on what the sea fairies had thrown overboard, and Jack's boat, in its eagerness to get on, went plunging through them so roughly that several were capsized. Upon this brown sea, fairies looked over and called out angrily, "Boat ahoy!" and the boat stopped. "Tell that boat of yours to mind what she's about," said the fairy sea captain to Jack. Jack touched his hat and said, "Yes, sir," and then called out to his boat, "You ought to be ashamed of yourself, running down these little live fishing vessels so carelessly. Go at a more gentle pace." So it swam more slowly, and Jack, being by this time hungry, curled himself in the bottom of the boat and fell asleep. He dreamt directly about a fowl and some potatoes, and he ate a wing, and then he ate a merry thought, and then somebody said to him that he better not eat any more, but he did. He ate another wing, and presently an apple pie came, and he ate some of that, and then he ate some more, and then he immediately awoke. "Now, that bird told me not to eat too much," said Jack, "and yet I have done it. I never felt so full in my life." And for more than half an hour he scarcely noticed anything. At last he lifted up his head and saw straight before him 2 great brown cliffs, and between them flowed in the wonderful river. Other rivers flow out, but this river flowed in, and took with it far into the land dolphins, swordfish, mullet, sunfish, and many other strange creatures. And that is one reason why it is called the Magic River, or the Wonderful River. At first it was rather wide, and Jack was alarmed to see what multitudes of soldiers stood on either side to guard the banks and prevent any from landing. He wondered how he should get the fairies on shore. However, in about an hour the river became much narrower, and then Jack saw that the guards were not real soldiers, but rose-colored flamingos. There they stood in long regiments among the reeds and never stirred. They are the only foot soldiers the fairies have in their pay. They are very fierce and never allow anything but a fairy ship to come up the river. They guarded the banks for miles and miles, many thousands of them, standing a little way into the water among the flags and rushes. But at last there were no more reeds and no soldier guards, for the stream became narrower and flowed between such steep rocks that no one could possibly have climbed them.